On September 17th, I had the opportunity to report on how Joe Biden not only wants to increase taxes on U.S. businesses and vast swaths of the working American populace, but also that he wants the feds to monitor your personal bank accounts to the most minute level.
It will give the IRS the resources it needs to keep up with the lawyers and accountants and the super wealthy. It would ask just for two pieces of information from the banks of these folks, that amounts that come into their bank accounts and what amounts go out of their bank accounts.
Come on, man. This has inspired widespread indignation among the American populace, but virtual silence within the GOP leadership. Hi, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. And, sometimes I chuckle at what I see happening in politics. Perhaps you do the same, and perhaps it's a survival mechanism. But in this case, I don't think there's really any way to chuckle. Get this. Politico reports that in a private meeting with other Democrat politicians, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat from California, just stressed that as the House, Senate, and White House move step by step towards what could be a $6 trillion spending scheme, fueled, of course, by those taxes I mentioned earlier and by a lot of government debt, Pelosi wants the central planners to avoid mentioning the overall price tag. Quote, "We should talk about what's in the bill. Let's not have a conversation about top line." End quote. Which is an obvious position to take for someone who wants to play favorites with all kinds of welfarist constituencies, including subsidizing broadband internet, adding port construction projects to most states, and further expanding Medicare and Medicaid, among many other wildly unconstitutional activities. And it's irksome, to say the least, not only because it follows the typical leftist pattern of avoiding the economic albatross that is federal spending, and of course, avoiding the implications such spending presents for taxation, debt financing, borrowing, and increased inflation of the money supply, but also because Pelosi is the skillful rhetorician who once fatuously said about Obamacare,
"But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it."
And once more, it's revealing and vexing to see how tepidly, how timidly GOP leadership, so-called, is responding to this proposed increase in taxes and to Pelosi's attempt to avoid discussion of the burdens they're going to place on generations of Americans and on the U.S. economy. Completely missing the point, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky merely chirped about the Democrats having to find the votes to raise the virtually useless government-defined, often disregarded so-called debt limit, saying in part, quote, "The debt ceiling will be raised as it always should be, but it will be raised by the Democrats." The fatuousness of this guy is just stunning. Unbelievable. Why are you even there, McConnell? That McConnell would take such a meek approach, that he would not stand up against tax increases, but instead would take a proverbial social justice warrior knee and spew lines about what is essentially a made-up bookkeeping trick about federal debt, that is typical of the country club wing of the GOP. And it energizes us to look to our own consciences and to our own principles and U.S. economic history, and to demand that people such as Senator McConnell uphold the principles of freedom and tax cuts that have helped Americans prosper every time they have been instituted. Even for a man who appears to be as disinterested in the salutary effects and moral primacy of lowering the tax burden on people, Mitch McConnell could strengthen his evidently weak knowledge base if he merely looked back 4 years to Donald Trump's 2017 proposal and the 2018 enactment of reductions in corporate taxes. As I've written for MRC-TV and as Reason's Veronique Derugue observed 3 years ago, Quote, the legislation, which permanently slashed corporate tax rates from 35% down to 21%, was only signed into law last month. But more than 100 companies have already indicated that they will make big moves to benefit workers and the economy, including raising wages, handing out bonuses, granting 401k increases, and committing to increased capital investment, while citing the law's reduction in the corporate income tax as at least part of the reason. End quote. Well, sadly, nothing is permanent in politics except the polis imposing itself. But the cause-effect relationship between Trump's move to lower taxes and subsequent betterment of livelihoods and benefits for American residents was evident, even early in Trump's presidency. Of course, at that early stage, some Americans wondered why business owners might act even before the tax cuts were finalized.
In terms of the bonus that corporate America received versus the crumbs that they are giving to workers to kind of put the schmooze on is so pathetic. It's so pathetic.
But as Hoover Institution fellow and Naval Postgraduate School economist David R. Henderson points out, when U.S.-based business owners got a sense that Trump successfully would reduce corporate taxes, they acted as rational participants in a market economy do. They tried to anticipate and tried to appeal to good employees. Quote, so again, with employers anticipating a tightening labor market, tightening even more with passage of the tax bill, it's reasonable to attribute some of the increase to forward-looking employers trying to get ahead of the labor market, end quote. David, if you're out there, thank you for the copy of the Fortune Encyclopedia on Economics. I cherish that book, thank you. And Henderson offers another salient thought about why those supposedly evil business owners might move to offer incentives prior to the passage of the Trump cuts. Quote, imagine that a company is going to give a bonus and is choosing whether to do so in 2017 or 2018. If it gives the bonus in 2017, it deducts that cost of labor from corporate income that faces a marginal tax rate of 35%. If it gives the bonus in 2018, it deducts it from corporate income taxed at a marginal tax rate of 21%. So, all else equal, it makes sense to give the bonus in 2017. And he adds, I'm ignoring state taxes on corporate income, end quote. The results of the Trump tax cuts on businesses and personal wages were clear. As I wrote in May of 2019, quote, recently released Labor Department data shows that the unemployment rate fell from 3.8% to 3.6% at the close of the first quarter of 2019, the lowest rate since 1969. That the U.S. economy added 263,000 new jobs, and that gross domestic product grew 3.2%, end quote. Similarly, the Associated Press reported that unemployment had hit a 49-year low. Quote, the unemployment rate for women fell last month to 3.1%, the lowest point since 1953. The rate for Latinos dropped to 4.2%, a record low since 1973 when the government began tracking the data. For Asians, joblessness has matched a record low of 2.2%, and the unemployment rate for veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars dropped to 1.7%, also a record low. And in 2018, the unemployment rate for African Americans hit just 6%, a record low that stayed close to that until COVID-19 lockdown mania gripped many state and local politicians. Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act began what was planned to be a $1.5 trillion package in tax cuts over 10 years, the 12th largest as a percentage of gross domestic product at the time of its passage. It not only saw the decrease in corporate taxes, it saw a near elimination of the pernicious alternative minimum tax. It saw a simplification of the tax code for most filers, a doubling of the child tax credit, a near doubling of the standard deduction, and cuts in personal income taxes for virtually every category of wage earner. Now, contrary to what the Democrats currently are touting as tax cuts, but really are expansions of the money redistributing earned income tax credit, which for years has been the leftist go-to for claiming tax cuts when they're really expanding welfare payments. The Trump cuts really did allow people to keep their own money and not have it taken and steered towards political interests instead of real, honest market competition. This isn't a hagiography of Trump's administration, but these recent tax cuts show us a lesson that is absolutely essential to stress to McConnell and his friends. And the lesson isn't just grounded in abstract numbers or ideas. These are lives, Mr. McConnell, the lives of people over whom you aren't supposed to have control. The interests of people that can only be reflected in a free market where earners can show their preferences as consumers, savers can offer their cash for investment in new ventures, suppliers can compete to lower costs, and new jobs can be created. Jobs that reflect real value, not politicized decisions from central command. As Nancy Pelosi tells her so-called team to focus on the programs, i.e. the feel-good manna she and the collectivists will shower on the people she seems to consider American livestock, well, Mr. McConnell and his milquetoast troupe of political performance artists might want to wake up to the reality that we in the hinterlands are fed up with being robbed, and that there are real-world positive lessons about the ethics and economics of tax cuts that we have to learn and retain. At MRC-TV, we plan to dive deeper into the evidence and American history of why tax cuts are utterly essential for real people. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Remember, keep fighting for freedom. You can find us at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. You can also find us on Facebook, videos housed on Rumble, and of course, on YouTube. We'll see you inside the comments section. Please share these videos with as many people as you can. If you are on, say, Facebook, you know that algorithms often suppress the material we create. I never thought that when my parents helped train me in economics, that when my father was writing on the interior of books by Ludwig von Mises and Henry Hazlitt and others, that the information that they gave me about economics and ethics would be suppressed by people far, far away running social media sites, people I never met. Their work to help me learn being suppressed by people who don't even know me. Crazy. I hope you'll spread the videos. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.